So in this part I am going to show how I made the tiling brick texture. I started it out by creating a few blocks that are twice as long as they are wide and tall. I then exported that into ZBrush, subdivided it a bit, and then just sculpted using the exact same techniques as I did in the previous video. Trimming down the edges a bit, giving it a bit of edge wear, then sculpting in some surface detail and just knocking it back with the Trim Smooth Border brush. So again, keeping in mind the textile density of 512, I have to decide how big I want my surface and texture to be. I have decided to make a fairly large texture, which will be good for texturing the big flat pieces of the buildings without being too noticeably repetitive. And the first thing I'm gonna do with these bricks, I'm just gonna set the origin to center of mass. This way when I rotate it around the medium point, it's just gonna rotate around its middle instead of around, well, the origin point, which is somewhere away from the brick. It makes it easier. And the next thing I'm gonna do is, as you can see, these bricks are sculpted on all four sides. That way I can duplicate the brick and just rotate it on the x-axis to get something that looks different, even though it's just the same brick. Even though I have 3 bricks, that's gonna end up being equivalent to having 12 bricks when I bake it into the texture. If I was going to make it only with 3 bricks and not rotating them, only viewing them from this side, it would be very repetitive. So I'm gonna duplicate these bricks 4 times, rather, so I have 4 of each. And then I'm gonna rotate the first row on the x-axis by 90 degrees. The second one I'm gonna rotate on x-axis by 180 degrees. And this one, the last one, I'm gonna rotate it on the x-axis by 90 degrees. This way, each of these bricks, each column is the same brick, but it's just rotated by 90 degrees, so it looks different. So even though I have only 3 bricks, it sort of works as if I had 12. And before I do that, I am going to add a plane, and I'm gonna make it my desired area, well, desired size, in this case 4 meters. The default size is 2 by 2 meters, which means I need to scale it by 2, and that's gonna be 4 meters. Just gonna rotate this on x-axis, so it's like that. So it's vertical, and these bricks are too big. Instead of being 40 centimeters big, well, 40 by 40, I made them way too big by accident. I'm just gonna scale them down by 0.1. Yeah, that looks more natural now. But before I start arranging them into a texture, one thing I'm going to do is select all of them, and I'm just gonna delete the back faces. That way I just have fewer polygons to work with. Gonna look at them from above, go into wireframe, edit mode, deselect everything, and then by pressing B, I'm going to open the box select, and I'm just gonna select parts of the bricks which you're not gonna be able to see, and just delete it. You're not gonna be able to see the backs anyways. I basically halved my poly count by doing that. Now comes the fun part. I'm just gonna start arranging them. So now that I placed all of them down, it's time to add a bit of randomness. I'm gonna hide this. I'm gonna type in select random. And 50% it's basically selected half of them for me. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna change the pivot point to active element. No, sorry, individual origins. That way when I rotate them, they're basically rotated individually instead of being all rotated at once, like that. So individual origins. And I'm gonna rotate them by 180 degrees. That way just randomly selected a few of them and turned them upside down. And now I'm just gonna scale them on the x-axis by -1. That way it just mirrors a few of them. So now I turned half of them upside down and mirrored half of them. That way not every one of them is the same. And now I just need to add a bit of rotation because this looks boring. So yeah, I'm just gonna keep using the select random function. This time I'm gonna make it a lot smaller, like, I don't know, 25% I guess. And I'm just gonna move them out a bit. Few of them out. Like that. That way some of them are poking a little bit further out than the rest of them. There we go, yeah. Now there's another function in Blender that I like to use for textures like this. It's called Randomize Transform. And with everything selected, what I can do now is just slightly rotate everything, slightly move something, make a few things smaller than the others. And let's try it. Let's go rotation, position Y on the green axis. That's annoying. I'm having quite a high polygon count, so it takes a while for Blender to process anything I do. So let's just try increasing this a bit and see what happens. 0.1 should be fine. Yeah, sadly I couldn't record that because it took way too long to apply changes, so it would be very unwatchable. I decided to not record that. So just experiment a bit. Next thing I'm gonna do, randomize the rotation and the scale, but I'm also not gonna record that because it's gonna take too long. So now that I'm done with that, I have to make sure that the texture is gonna tile into all directions. Because the texture is gonna be pretty much the exact same size as this plane is going to be. That's very simple to do. Just select these bricks that are poking out and then paste them here. That way, once I bake this out into the texture and once it's tiling, it just continues. There will be no seam. The texture ends here and it begins here, and so does this brick. That way there's not gonna be any seams going down my texture. And the next thing I have to do is, well, fix the top. Make it so none of these bricks poke out above the top of the texture. That way on the top of my texture it's just going to be this very thin line of mortar, which is gonna be really easy to seam. Fix the seaming, sorry. Just make sure none of them are poking out. For this one, now that I moved it, the texture isn't going to continue just from this end here into that end there, because the brick is slightly moved and there's going to be a seam. So I have to copy paste it there again. And on this bottom part, as soon as my Blender starts responding again, I am not going to bother with making sure none of them poke out. What I'm going to do is, well, other than these ones at the end. Actually, no, those ones are fine too. I'm just gonna select any of these that are poking out. Actually, I'm gonna make this one poke out slightly a bit more, just for a bit of variety. And I'm gonna duplicate it, move it up, over there. This way, this part of the texture, again, just continues into this part of the texture. The reason I did that, why I didn't just move them like this, rotate it so none of them are poking out, is because it's gonna be really obvious that there's a seam going on because on these parts, on the other parts of the texture, you're gonna have a very jagged mortar. As you can see, it's not straight, and up here it'll just be straight if none of these bricks would continue from one end to the other. It just breaks up this thin line of mortar, makes it less noticeable that it's just a tiling texture. Now, for the same reason as in my previous video, I need to assign vertex colors, individual vertex colors for all of these bricks. That will allow me to just break up the uniform color in Substance Painter later. Give each of these bricks a slightly different color. I'm gonna start doing that by hiding this plane in the back. And again, I'm just gonna do select random. And I'm gonna select 1/5 of these, so 20%. And I'm gonna join them. That way I don't have to vertex paint each individual one of these. I can just do it for all of them at once. And this is happening because it flipped the normals. If I go around, yeah, it's basically inside out, and the way to fix that is go into edit mode, select everything, and then as soon as it starts responding, and then do recalculate normals and wait some more. Now, it didn't work for some of them, so I'm gonna have to go back into edit mode, wait for it to start responding again. I'm going to go into face selection mode, so it's easier to see what's going on. I'm gonna deselect everything. And then I'm gonna find the ones that are invisible, select one face on each of them, press Ctrl L to select all of them, and do it again. Actually, no, flip normals this time. And it's gonna flip the normals to the other side. So it's not inside out anymore. And that should fix it now. Yeah, that fixed it. I'm gonna go into Vertex Paint. And I'm gonna select a color. I'm gonna go with red. Next one's gonna be green, then blue, then just something else, I guess. Shift K to fill it. And back into object mode. I'm gonna hide this one, this group of bricks that we already painted. And I'm gonna do select random again. This time I'm gonna select 1/4. So 25%. And I'm just gonna repeat the process, which I'm not gonna record because I don't want the video to be too long. Okay, now all of my bricks are vertex painted. The last thing I need to do is create a low poly plane and join everything up and fix the seams in the vertex paint. So I'm gonna move this forwards a bit. This is gonna be our mortar, mind you, so it has to go slightly, well, very close to the end of the bricks. Just looks better than if it's just somewhere far back. You could go for something like this if you're interested in having mortar that spills out onto the bricks, but I don't like that and I don't feel like sculpting it. And for just something like this, it's gonna look good enough if I just leave it like this. That's gonna be good enough. So I'm gonna copy paste the plane. I'm gonna name this one Brick Slow. And I'm just gonna hide it. I'm not gonna need it for now. I'm gonna select the mortar plane. The plane that's gonna be mortar. And I'm gonna go into Vertex Paint. And I'm gonna give it a color that has not been assigned to anything else yet. In this case, I'm just gonna make it black. Like that. Now if I join everything up, make sure my plane is make sure my plane is the last one selected. That way everything that I join together is going to have the origin set to the origin of the plane. Okay, so I'm going to have to go and fix the seaming issues. If I went into Vertex Paint right now, which I'm not gonna do because it's gonna take 3 hours again, some of these bricks that are supposed to tile and stretch to the other side don't have the same vertex color. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna go into face selection mode. I'm gonna select the brick on this side and the corresponding brick on the other side. And it selected the wrong one. Nice. What's going on? Come on, there we go. I select one face here. I'm just gonna do that a couple of times. For a few other ones, again, I'm not gonna record that because my PC really doesn't like being in edit mode. I'm just gonna skip that part and record back once I'm done. So now I have these bricks selected. I'm going to go into Vertex Paint mode and Blender stopped working again. That's great. Now that I'm finally in Vertex Paint mode, I'm going to go to face selection here. This way it masks only the faces that I selected in edit mode. And I'm just gonna select the color and make sure all of them are the same color. So now that I finished Vertex painting everything, I imported my low poly plane into Substance Painter. And I'm just quickly gonna do a test bake to see if everything works. I'm just gonna bake the normal map because that's gonna give me the best preview. Gonna select my high poly. And now here's the thing, I don't know how much I have to set this to. How far the rays are being cast from our low poly plane to capture the detail in the high poly. I know that 0.01 is not gonna be enough because I already tried it, but I'm gonna try 0.03, see if it works. And I'm just gonna quickly bake it and see what it looks like. And there we go. It seemed to have baked fine. There are no flat pieces, nothing is missing. I'm quickly gonna try lowering the number to see if that works as well. Keep in mind this ray distance has to be as low as as you can get it to be. And there we go, yeah, 0.02 is a bit too low. You can see here that there are a few parts of our texture missing. You can see how this brick is slightly slanted and the top of it is not getting baked in. So just gonna quickly increase the ray back to 0.03. That way we don't have to waste time baking the whole texture set at our desired resolution, which is gonna take a while. That's why I like to do test bakes first. And now it seems fine. I'm gonna go for the real bake. I am gonna set my texture resolution to be 2048 by 2048. I decided the size to be 4 meters by 4 meters, and I want my textile density to be 512. So 4000 divided by 2000 is 500. Close enough. For my ID, I'm gonna select Vertex Color. And I'm also gonna enable ambient occlusion and curvature. That's all I need. And back at my main settings, I'm gonna set the dilation width to 0. Because our entire object, low poly object, is taking up the entire UV space. We don't have to have any dilation. And I'm gonna set the anti-aliasing to 2x2, just so it's not that, just so it looks better. I never go higher. I find that 2x2 is good enough. I'm gonna bake it out. Okay, so now that I got everything baked out, all of my textures, I am going to again use the WER smart material. Again, I'm gonna link it in the description to where you can buy it on Artstation. Or rather, I'm gonna use this one that I made that's slightly different. Oh, there's a bit of an error over there. Our texture is clipping. Yeah. I didn't set the distance to be high enough, so I'm gonna have to do the test bake again. I'm gonna remove all of that. I'm gonna set it back to just normal map. And I'm gonna set this to 512. And I'm gonna increase this a slight bit. I'm gonna try increasing it by 0.05. 0.005 rather. Let's see if it works now. It was quite hard to spot the clipping because I didn't have the ambient occlusion baked out. Or the base color rather. Because when you're baking out the base color, it will make anything that is clipping as transparent and it's easier to spot it. Okay, I think that's gonna be fine now. Let's do it again. Yeah, here you can see that it's quite easy to fix mistakes like that. I decided to keep that in the video. Just so you can see that testing things out and see what works best is quite a big part of 3D. Even though it's something very small in this case, you should just learn to experiment, see how things work out before you implement them. Okay, now that I baked everything out again, there's no more errors. And wow, this texture looks crisp. I like it, so far, at least. Anyways, I'm gonna use this stone, which is made from these ones that I'm gonna link, and it's slightly edited. And I'm gonna put it onto one of my masks, Vertex painted masks. And I'm gonna color code everything so it's easier to see where one folder starts and when one folder ends. That way it'll be easier to see what I'm doing when I go into all of the subfolders. And I'm gonna put a 1 at the end. I'm gonna take this one, put it onto the next mask. Actually, I should color code them according to their vertex color. That would be better. I'm gonna name this one 2. I'm gonna put this one here. I'm going to put a 3 at the end. I'm gonna make it green. Or color code it. Color coded as well. And the last one, I think it's only one more. Yeah, the light blue one. And do the same. Well, and we don't have light blue, so I'm just gonna leave it as black. Oh, wow, this already looks pretty great, honestly. It looks really nice so far. I'm gonna have to change the color because in the reference image the walls are almost completely white. Again, I'm gonna use the HSL Perceptive. I'm gonna crank up the brightness to... Yeah, I'm just gonna make it completely white. I'm gonna make the next one a slight bit darker. so there's some variation. I'm also gonna make it more saturated. Does that even make a difference? Oh, looks like I'll have to do that manually. Alright. And subtlety is the name of the game. Again, if I go too dark, it's gonna be way too noticeable. So just barely any darker than the previous one. Again, slightly darker. And for these ones here, I'm just gonna give him a slight color. Actually, no, the green one, I'm just gonna leave it. I'm also gonna make it a little bit darker. And for these two now, I'm going to add another layer, and I'm gonna give him a slight color. I'm pretty sure there's a proper way of doing it, but I'm just gonna keep it simple. I'm going to add a new fill layer. I'm gonna disable all the controls except the color. I'm gonna make it red. And I'm just gonna crank this down by a lot. Actually, first I'll make the bricks brighter. And there we go. And I'm just gonna give it a bit of color. Very tiny bit. If I show you from afar, and that's another thing, if you're making things that are gonna be repeated and mostly viewed from up far, you should also zoom out a little bit and see how it looks like when you're looking at it from afar, when you're working on it. That way it gives you a better representation of what it's gonna look like in the end. And let me show you what I wanted to show you now. Even if I give it a slight bit color, if I look at it from up close, this looks fine, right? You can barely see the redness. But if I zoom out, the whole texture has a bit of a red hue to it. That's why it's important to look at your things when you're working on them at the distance that they're supposed to be viewed. So yeah, I'm gonna make this way less. Am I recording? Yeah, I am. Very tiny bit. I guess 0.03. Well, rather 3%, which is the same to 0.03. And for this one, I'm gonna add a bit of yellowness to it. Again, fill layer, disable everything, and just make it yellow. And wow, I guess I didn't do a very good job when I was Vertex painting this, because all of these yellow pieces are on the edges. If I were to tile this texture, even if the colors were very subtle, it'll be quite noticeably sort of boxed in, I guess is a good way to put it. You would have these yellow pieces only on the edges like that, and it'd be very noticeable that it's tiling, so I'm gonna have to add the yellow color to something else. Let's find one that has more randomness to it. Yeah, I guess the blue one is fine. I'm gonna add the yellow layer here. Again, disable everything. Make it yellow. Actually, maybe even a bit orange. A bit of a warmer tone to it. Yeah. And make it very, very weak again. And if I look at my reference image now, and compare the colors, as soon as it opens, yeah, I need to make everything way brighter. We can compare the colors like this. So my whole texture is a bit darker. I guess I'll export it to Unreal once I'm done, just to see what the colors look like, and then I'm gonna make any final adjustments. But yeah, everything needs to be way brighter now. With very small variations. I guess now that I made it brighter, I should add a bit more redness to it as well. Also, another thing, because I'm working with such a very pale texture that doesn't have much color in it, any colors that I add manually are immediately gonna pop out way more than they would on anything else, because everything next to it is just white and desaturated. I guess I should make it more slightly orange. As you can see, the red pops out way more than the yellow. Anything with a yellow hue, even orange, it's half red, half yellow. So I have to make it stronger than it was when it was just red. Guess that's fine. Yeah, these ones need to be brighter as well. And I guess a lot of the brightness in this texture is gonna come out when once I light my entire environment. Even if I crank up the brightness a lot more, even if I made it just white, it would not be interesting enough. It would just look too flat. So again, I'll have to see what it looks like in Unreal. As you can see, it's just a little bit too gray. It needs to be just a bit more white, but it's fine for now. Once I make the sun rays in Unreal a lot more brighter, I guess the texture is gonna be a lot more brighter as well. Just gonna have to see how it fits in with the lighting, actually, before I make any further edits. And I guess I should also mention, this image here is what I'm gonna use as the reference. Something like this. A lot of dirt on it. And this already looks fine, but as you can see, it's just a flat gray color. So I'm gonna take one of these WER stones and just gonna apply it to where my mortar is supposed to be. And see what it looks like. It's gonna look too dark because it's multiplied by the ambient occlusion as well. That's why it looks darker than it is. As you can see, if I applied it there to everything. Places where it's not inside of cracks is actually a lot brighter than where it is in cracks, naturally. It's a very realistic phenomenon, but I don't want it to be this dark. So yeah, I'm just gonna play around a bit to get it to look brighter. I'm gonna try editing this. And that already made it look better. Actually, I'm gonna try editing this. I wanted to give it a green hue, but again, it's so desaturated. Even if I crank this up, it just doesn't have any saturation. Let me try if I can. No, I can't. Well, I guess I'm gonna have to add another color layer to it. Fill layer, disable everything. Put it at the top. And now again, it's just flat, but that's because this is too strong. Gonna give it a bit of color. Gonna make it slightly yellow-green. That way it looks a bit more like moss has started gathering in there. Oh, that's actually fine. I thought I would have to add a mask to it with a bit of randomness, like clouds on it. But if I just make it very, very weak, That looks fine. The darker spots look greener and the whiter spots don't look as saturated. They just look white. That actually looks nice. Actually, it's a bit too noticeable in these areas here. Yeah, I'm gonna try adding a mask to it and see what it looks like. Add black mask. Add fill. I'm just gonna find a grunge that I like. I guess this one. Actually, I'm gonna search around a bit. I'm just gonna use the dots or other spots. One of these should do. I'll try this one. I'm gonna crank this all the way up. Go into mask view. This way I can edit it better. Just gonna make it more like that. Just so there's a bit more contrast and the white areas are gonna be green in the end, so I have more of that going on. Yeah, that's a little bit too much whiteness. That should be better. Yeah. Now I'm just gonna make the blending a bit less strong. I guess I should make it darker as well. Just gonna play around a bit to see what works better. Yeah, that's starting to look like it's covered in a bit of moss. Dirt and grime. And it's gonna be viewed. Yeah, that looks fine. You can still see a little bit of greenness every once in a while. I guess where the gaps are thicker. Oh yeah, that's another thing I forgot to mention. The reason why I didn't do the same thing as I did last time where I rotated some of these textures. As you can see, these gaps are thick enough to not even be able to notice that the texture is just stretched across all of them. I guess this area here a little bit, but because of the edges, because the edges are very thick and the gaps are also very thick, you can't notice it. Yeah, that looks fine. Actually, it's still a little bit too red. Yeah, that's much better. It's still slightly saturated, but it doesn't overpower the rest of the texture. Now, the next thing I'm going to add to this texture is a bit of leaking, like a bit of fluid that's spilling from up in these grooves down onto the bricks. And the way I'm gonna do that is with a particle paintbrush. So I'm gonna add a new layer. Gonna name it Leaks. Gonna make it very dark. Sort of close to what the color of the cracks is, the mortar. That actually looks nice with a bit of variation in the roughness. Wow. I'm gonna add a black mask. Add a paint. And I'm going to go down into the particles. I'm just gonna choose one of these and just paint onto it. Just gonna find out which one works best. Nah, that looks a little bit... Oof, yeah, that's way too strong. Also, as you can see, our particles follow the gaps in the normal map. It also takes normal map into consideration. If I put it here, it's just gonna first leak down here. And then once it hits the other brick, it just spreads. I think that looks really nice, but not what I'm looking for right now. This would be, I guess, good for if I was trying to paint someone hosing it down with a hose and then the water just spreading, but that's not what I'm looking for. I want just very gradual, very small leaks. If I increase this, it's gonna be way more affected by the normal map. As you can see, it actually can't get past towards where the new brick starts. If I set it to 0, it doesn't take the normal map into any consideration. It just flows all over it. And I'm not getting the desired look from this brush. So I'm actually gonna try something else. I'm gonna add a fill layer. And I'm just gonna look for a grunge that looks sort of like smudges. That one's a bit too harsh. I guess that one looks fine. Let's see. Yeah. Oh yeah, that actually looks really nice. I'm gonna make it tile twice. Just gonna play around with the settings a bit. I'm not getting enough fluid here, so actually let me decrease it even further. I don't want it to be wet all over. I just want to have a very few wet spots, leaky spots. Yeah. This part here is a little bit too pristine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy paste this. I'm just gonna change the tiling of this a little bit to get a bit more variation to it. Let's try that. No. Maybe offset it. I'm gonna try making it so that these leaks, they start at where the cracks are. So it looks like there's just some dirt leaking out of the cracks. For example, take this into look at this, the way it is right now. Then if I move it here, that just looks a lot more natural. Yeah. And now I'm just gonna add a paint. I'm gonna disable the other one for now. I'm gonna set the blending mode to multiply. And if I look at my paint now, mask, I am just going to go and paint away some of the areas I don't like. I'm gonna have to select a brush first, something with rough edges. And there I go. And I'm just gonna paint away some of these spots that go into the top brick. Again, I'm going for the look where it looks like these leaks are coming from the moss. Or rather, the dirt that's inside of the cracks. I'm also gonna make it look like it leaks from here, down here, and then it ends where the other brick begins, because water could not leak past the other brick, it just stops in the cracks. I guess that's not very realistic, it will just keep flowing down, but I just prefer the way it looks. It looks a bit more interesting. And I'm gonna do the same for the other one. I'm gonna add a paint. Set it to multiply. I'm just gonna paint away some of the areas where the leaks start at the middle of the brick, because that's not very realistic. Plus it doesn't look as interesting. This one, I don't like this line, it's a bit too harsh, so I'm just gonna remove the entirety of it. And if I decide to undo my eraser, if I delete this and if I don't like it, I can just paint it back by painting in white into the paint layer. There's a bit too much dirt going on here, so I'm gonna paint away a bit of it. Same here. That's a bit too dirty. Maybe I could also try making it so some of these fluid splotches, they go outwards a bit. Let's see what that looks like. I'll see if I like it. Actually, yeah, that doesn't look realistic. I'm just gonna leave that out. Just gonna leave it as is. And another thing that I'm going to do is I am going to add a bit of cracks to this. So I'm gonna add a new layer. Fill layer. I'm gonna disable everything. Actually, I'm gonna leave some color in so it's easier to see what's going on. Add a black mask. Add a fill. I went around looking for a texture that I like, and I like this one. So I'm gonna put it there, go to mask, and I'm gonna increase the contrast a bit. So I mostly have only these cracks and not many of these pocks going on. Yeah. I'm gonna change the scale a bit. I try to keep whole numbers, not like with a decimal at the end. That way it's easier to make a tile in the end. Yeah, let's see what that looks like. Go into material. Yeah, I have to disable the color. Actually, no, better. It would be to just invert the mask. Add levels. Invert. There we go. Can't really see them. But yeah, let's just crack this up and see what it looks like. Oh, yeah, that looks nice. That actually looks really nice. The problem is, yeah, it's not very smooth. That's because I increased the contrast too much. But the thing is, if I don't increase the contrast, yeah, that just looks like elephant skin. It has to have very strong contrast. The way to fix that is to just blur my end result. I'm gonna blur it, add filter, blur by a tiny amount. And that looks better. That also made my cracks slightly wider and less harsh. So what I'm gonna do now is increase the height. Sorry, decrease it, make it a bit less pronounced. I guess like that. No, a bit less. There we go. But now our cracks are going through the entire texture, through all of the bricks, and I don't like that. So what I'm going to do here is add a mask with color selection. And I'm just gonna select one of these colors. So the cracks are just gonna be on those bricks. That's not what I wanted. I'll have to fix that, and the easiest way is to just add a folder. Cracks. Add this to the folder and put the mask onto the folder. And turns out I'll have to undo the color selection until I have cracks again, and now create the folder. Add the layer into the folder and add a color selection here. Let's see if that works. Yeah, that works now. Okay, now I only have cracks on a few of these bricks. I guess these cracks are a little bit too small for my taste, so I'll have to go back and make them bigger again. Just set it back to 1. See what that looks like. Yeah, that looks better. That looks way better. I just have to blur them a bit more. Actually, looks better if I remove the blur. I guess I'll have to play with the contrast. I guess that looks fine. I could go and manually paint these dots out, but kind of like them. They kind of look nice. The height map is a bit too strong, so it'll make them less pronounced. Yeah, that looks better. I think that's it for my texture for now. I will export it as is. I'll have one texture that has a lot of dirt and grime on it and cracks. And then for the next one, I'm gonna have 2 textures, and the second one is gonna have all of this disabled. It's just gonna be pristine and, well, new looking. And then once I'm in Unreal Engine, I will set up a very basic Vertex Paint shader. And the shader is going to blend between these 2 textures, and wherever I paint it, I will be able to replace this pristine texture with this very old, dirty one. That way it's just not gonna be the same texture everywhere. There's gonna be a bit of variation to it. And yeah, I guess that's it for this part. This is how I create my tiling textures, or at least brick in my case, but it's kind of the same for most of my workflow for most other types of textures. I prefer to sculpt some detail and then add a bit more to it, or rather, I like to sculpt my base shapes and add a little bit of detail in either Substance Painter or Substance Designer. If I were making a ground texture, I would prefer to use a photo scan, which I guess is something I will use. I will show how I do in another video. Or I would just take an image and create texture from that, just from one image, make it seamless, and then generate the other ones that I need with Substance Designer or Substance Alchemist. And for really simple textures like plaster, I would just spend like half an hour creating it in Substance Designer. Speaking of Substance Designer, you could make this straight up in Substance Designer, but considering I only need 1 brick texture, I prefer to sculpt it and texture it manually than creating a whole graph in Substance Designer, which would take way longer than it would to sculpt it. The only upside to that I see is I would be able to very easily edit it into multiple brick textures. But again, I just need one for now, so I decided to just sculpt it. Plus it has that more stylized look to it. I don't want it to be incredibly realistic. I want a bit of interesting shapes to it, I guess. And wear and tear, in my opinion, is my favorite way to make a texture look more interesting.